When you hear the word war, you picture gunfire, battlefields torn up by conflict, terrible losses, and all manner of harrowing images. This war, however, was quite different. The longest war in history is quite a strange one. It began in 1651 and was fought all the way until 1986, a total of 335 years. This ridiculously long war involved the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly, some tiny islands off the coast of Cornwall, England. Despite the war's great length, there were no deaths, injuries, or even battles. Why was this so? Let's find out. Now, to understand how this war began, we must go back to 1640s England, where, as was common in those times, a much more real and deadly civil war was ongoing. It was being fought between the Parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell, a meanie who later got rid of Christmas, and the Royalists, led by King Charles I and later Charles II, who has the best horrible history song. Now, the Parliamentarians were beating the Royalists and had driven them all the way back to Cornwall, a small part of England. They were very much on track to win the war. Now, what has this got to do with the Dutch declaring war on some tiny islands? Well, the Dutch, who were longtime allies of England, decided to join the conflict. Like any smart person during the lunchtime game of football in primary school, they wanted to join the side that was going to win. So, they teamed up with the Parliamentarians. The Royalists, who were friendly with the Dutch, felt betrayed, so they heavily raided Dutch merchant ships for revenge. The Royalists, however, were still losing the war and had now been pushed all the way back to the Isles of Scilly, which was now all they held. The Dutch weren't best pleased about being raided of all their waffles, and they thought they would try and get some back. So, in March 1651, Dutch Admiral Tromp, not to be confused with a rather different world leader, sent 12 warships to the Isles of Scilly to threaten the Royalists and demand reparations for the attacks on their navy. The Royalists said nay, so naturally Tromp declared war on them. There was war. However, unlike as expected in war, there were no invasions, no battles, and no bloodshed. This is because the Dutch saw the diminishing Royalist numbers and very little to gain from their attack, so Admiral Tromp and his fleet just blockaded the Scilly Isles, but did not invade. The Civil War was still going on, and 3 months later, in June of 1651, the Parliamentarians had truly beaten the Royalists and forced them to surrender, meaning that the Isles of Scilly were passed over to Parliamentarian control. The Dutch, still at war with the Royalists, had no one to fight against, so they lifted the blockade and sailed home, forgetting they were technically still at war with the Isles of Scilly. Interestingly, some people argue whether the war was even legitimate. Some accounts say that Tromp didn't actually have the authority to declare a war, while others say that a war couldn't have existed because the Scilly Isles weren't actually a nation, they're just a part of England. Also, a few years later in 1654, a treaty between England and the Netherlands was formed after another war. There were lots of wars going on in the 1600s, so any ongoing war should have been resolved then. Nevertheless, it is interesting to look into. When the Dutch got home, they never remembered that they were still at war. The forgotten war continued on for centuries until in 1986, a historian from the Isles of Scilly did some investigating and realised that the war was still, in theory, ongoing. So the historian wrote to the Dutch embassy in London, who, after realising he was correct, sent the Dutch ambassador to the islands to settle the matter. So, on April 17th, 1986, after 335 years, yet without a single shot being fired, the longest running war in history was officially over. There was peace at last. The ambassador even jokingly said, "It must have been awful to know we could have attacked at any moment." So, the residents of the Isles of Scilly could finally rest easy, as can you after this history lesson. Please like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying what you think of the video. Thanks for watching.